This is the Whimsy Farm Podcast. I'm Carolyn Crane.
There's a big wide world right out your door. Good people doing good things. Whoa, it's a big, big wide world. Now is the time. Now is our time.
Welcome, everyone. On episode 6, we talk about gun violence and gun safety legislation. I'm honored to speak with two women, Gwendolyn LaCroix of Michigan and Amanda Wilcox of Colorado. Gwen and Amanda are mothers who suffered the most horrible loss, the death of a child. Each of them lost a child to gun violence. What's incredible is that through this loss, they became change agents, working as activists to help save the lives of other children. They share their stories with me, as well as what they are doing today to reduce gun violence. Today, we visit with Amanda Wilcox and Gwendolyn LaCroix. Both have children that were victims of gun violence and are activists in the gun violence and gun safety legislation. Welcome, Amanda and Gwen.
Thank you.
I want to start today by, if we could all share our screens. First, we'll look at a picture of Laura. I'd like to celebrate your children and have our YouTube listeners be able to see them. So let's start with Amanda and share Laura's picture. Amanda, tell us a little bit about Laura.
Laura was bright and beautiful at age 19 when she was killed. She grew up in rural Nevada County, was a sophomore at Haverford College outside of Philadelphia, and clearly on a path to make a positive difference in the world. She was actually in the midst of her campaign for the student body presidency at the time of her death. Both in high school and college, she was active with service organizations, particularly working with youth who maybe suffered abuse, and then later with teens who maybe have eating disorders or other issues in their life. She was very interested in government and politics and social justice, and was hoping upon graduation to perhaps work with the Friends Committee on Legislation, which is the longest serving peace lobby in Washington, D.C., and work on political issues and justice issues for that organization. And who knows what she would have done after that. But she was a stellar student, graduated as a Victorian, and had tremendous capability, organizational skills, energy, and promise. And she was very kind and had a huge circle of friends. Her teachers adored her, and no one deserves to be killed by gunfire. But as so many said after her death, that there wasn't anyone who less deserved it than her. And obviously it changed my life forever, but we can talk about that later.
What happened on that January day, 2001?
So she was filling in at the Nevada County Behavioral Health Department when a client with an appointment walked in. Laura was filling in as the receptionist. She's behind a glass wall, a glass partition. And a client came in for his regularly scheduled appointment and just immediately opened fire through the glass. And he shot Laura 4 times, twice in the chest, once in the back, and once in the hip. The fatal bullet hit, I think, 5 of her organs. We believe she died instantly. Later, the person in the funeral home told us that she still had her pen in her hand, which he had never seen before. So our hope is that she never witnessed a violent act. The gunman walked through the hall of the clinic. He shot another person and severely injured, a third person that he shot. employees. He tried opening the doors in the hall. Employees, of course, were panicked. Two were trying to hide behind a refrigerator in the break room. One jumped out a window, second-story window, and severely injured her back and lower legs. And then he left. Didn't shoot anymore there and went to a nearby restaurant, what was then called Lyons Restaurant, and asked to see the manager, whom he shot and killed, and then shot a cook who was trying to run and get help. Then he went home and took a nap, and he woke up and called his brother and said, I think I did something wrong. I think I killed people. And his brother notified local law enforcement, and he was apprehended without any further injury, thank goodness. I was home when the shootings happened, working in my home office. I wasn't listening to the radio or anything like that, had no idea what was going on. And then a friend of Laura's called around 2 o'clock in the afternoon and said, Did you hear about a shooting in Nevada County? I said, no, I don't know anything about it. And then I thought, oh my, Columbine. And this was 2 years after Columbine. I had Laura's younger brothers were in high school, middle school. And first thing that came to my mind was a school shooting. And I turned on the local radio station and then said there's a shooting at the County Health and Human Services building. And I thought, oh, thank goodness not the schools. And then I remembered Laura's working there. So I called the sheriff department. I called a friend of Laura's who actually had a job with 911 as a 911 dispatcher. And I kept making calls and finally got through and I asked for information and they didn't have any information to give me. And every 20 minutes or so I would call. Looking back at it, I realized that I was always relieved when they couldn't tell me anything because as long as I didn't know, I could still have hope. But if something had happened, if Laura was alive, she would have called me. She would have known I would have been worried. I was telling myself she is being debriefed. That's why she couldn't call. She is a witness, so she couldn't call. And it's just amazing what your mind does, I think, for self-survival and to let the truth seep in slowly. I remember a neighbor called and I asked her to bring our younger son home from middle school, which she did. And she came in and she said, Have you called your husband, Nick, your husband? I said, Oh, no, I'm sure Laura will be fine. And she said, Call him. And I think it's pretty clear people at the school knew by that time the librarian's daughter worked at the behavioral health department. Um, I think sort of everyone knew but me in a way. And I did not know because I didn't want to know. I wanted to keep hoping. I did call my husband. He came home. Their son drove himself home. It was dinner time by this time, and Laura was actually shot at 11:30 in the morning. And we knew something was wrong. And my husband called, and I think because it was a different voice, um, it wasn't the usual response, and they connected him with the sheriff, and he told us that Laura had been killed. And I remember my two sons and I were standing next to my husband, and all of a sudden I had to know, I couldn't bear it. And I just said, What happened to Laura? What happened to Laura? And he said, Laura was killed. Our older son, I remember he yelled out, No! My younger son cried out, and I just felt like I was underwater. And I walked over to our big easy chair in the living room as if I was underwater, kind of numb with my senses diminished. And my two tall teenage sons got into my lap. And for our family, life was over as we knew it.
Oh, Amanda, thank you for sharing that story. Just incredible to fathom what you went through. And now we're going to turn to Jonah. Gwen, if you want to share your screen and tell us about this lovely young man here.
So I'm so sorry to hear your story, Amanda. So Jonah was 17 when he died. He was exactly it was exactly a month after his 17th birthday. Um, this picture here shows him with my nibbling Shar, who is now 11. So this is when Jonah was about, oh, now I have to do the math. I think he was 14 in this picture. He was a tall kid. He was 6'2". He loved to play basketball. He loved to draw. He always had really long fingers, like you can see in this picture, even when he was a baby. And he was a gentle giant. But Jonah, he loved to argue. He could debate anything. He could, you could, he would argue with you that whether if the sky was blue or not. But he was very, very intelligent. He was a National Honor Society student. And at his funeral, football team from the high school that he had just moved from to go to an early college program told me that he had helped them through math.
Mm.
Would pass math. And Jonah dreamed of being a philosopher, and I used to tease him and say, "Okay, well, I don't know what the game plan is then. Does that mean that we're gonna hang out in Paris and in coffee shops for the rest of our life?" But yeah, he was a big thinker. Um, and he loved to play Madden 25 on the video games, and he loved reading manga. And before that, he also liked like the Percy Jackson books and books about Greek myths, things like that. So um that's who Jonah was. He was the biggest brother. He was my first child. It was just me and Jonah when he was born. And I was very lucky to have a lot of time with him. I later met a man who did adopt him as his son. Um, and we went on to adopt a child together, Jude, and have two younger children. So then we had Jack, and then we had James. And when Jonah died, Jude, who was adopted, um, was 10. He shared a bedroom with Jonah. And Jack was 6, and James was 3.
What happened?
So Jonah had struggled with mental health from a young age. I think the first time he told me that he thought about suicide, he was 7 or 8. It must have been 7. And what we came to find out was that Jonah was bipolar. It's pretty classic and early onset. Um, and he did very well on medication for a long time, but those medications have severe side effects. And so we tried, to go to less medications that had less side effects. And, he had told us, kind of on and off that he really struggled with these thoughts. Um, and on the night in question, we were at, we had gone out. I had bought him sushi for dinner. I was running some errands, and he was like, "Hey, can I get some sushi?" That was his favorite food. And I said, "Sure." And I'm just gonna run to the pharmacy and pick up your brother's prescription, when you can grab your sushi. And I pull back around to the restaurant, and it was like a beautiful October evening, still warm, and he was sitting there in his shorts on the curb eating his sushi. And I just thought, what a beautiful young man I have. Um, and we drove home. We started to watch the last presidential debate before the 2016 election. And we got into a stupid argument about who would be a worse president, Donald Trump or Alec Baldwin. Well, we know the answer to that now. And like I say, me and Jonah cared a lot about stupid stuff, but he got mad at me, and I was trying to get him to go to bed, and I was like, because was hard to wake up in the morning, and we carpooled together, and I said, Jonah, let's just go to bed. And I took his phone because I wanted him to go to sleep. He got really upset about that. And um, he pulled a knife on me, which he had never done before. He would get very, very angry. That was part of who he was, but he would usually then like storm out of the house, walk around the neighborhood, come home and be like, sorry, mom. And I'd be like, oh, I know. It's okay. I'm glad you could walk around. But this night he somehow had a hunting knife. I don't even know where that came from. Didn't know it was in the house. I thought he had a one of our dull kitchen knives. And he came to the door of my room and was like, give me my phone. And I tried to close the door and kind of push against him, and the knife went into my arm. And it was a very sharp knife, so it cut very deep. And I was like, oh my God, I have to go to the hospital. And I went and went downstairs and told my ex-mother-in-law who was living with us um, that I needed to go to the hospital. And we bundled the other children into the car. We thought we had secured all the doors and that Jonah was outside, where he usually would walk around. I didn't want to call the police because I didn't want him to get in trouble. And we should have I should have just called an ambulance and had them take me and Jonah to the hospital. But we had moved a few months beforehand, and I didn't realize that there was a pistol in the hallway closet. Or my ex-husband had not secured it. And I don't know whether Jonah was still in the house or he somehow got back in the house. But while we were at the hospital, he took off his glasses and lay down on the floor and shot himself in the right temple. Um, I was at the hospital getting stitches, and I had actually left my phone at home. Um, so they had taken me back, and they said, well, how did you hurt yourself? And I said, oh, I fell on a glass. Again, I didn't want him to get into trouble. Um, and I had called my now ex-husband with my ex-mother-in-law's phone and said, we had kind of talked it over, and I said, you go home and get Jonah and bring him to the hospital, because I knew he was, going to be in crisis. And he said, okay. He had been on a fire initially when I tried to call him from the house after it immediately happened. He's a firefighter. He's actually fire chief now. But and so he had called, we had been able to get a hold of him when we first got to the hospital. But then my ex-mother-in-law took the children back home while I was waiting to get stitches. And there was a phone on the side of the wall in the ER where my bed was. And I called after a while when I knew my ex-husband should be home. And I said, how are you? And he said, I'm okay. And I said, how's Jonah? And he said, not okay. And as soon as he said that, I just knew. And then the doctor came in, and he had a tattoo of some Latin words. And I said, what does your arms? Well, he said, why are you crying? And I said, I think my son killed himself. And he kind of did a double take. And, the security guards came in to interview me. And the doctor had this Latin phrase. And I said, what does the Latin phrase mean? And he said, as long as I breathe, I hope. Um, and then I had to wait at the hospital until my ex-husband came, and they put me in a, glass cubicle because, well, anyone who's ever worked in healthcare know what it sounds like when someone comes to tell you that your child is dead. And my ex-mother-in-law had brought the children home and then came upstairs she'd put them fortunately to bed downstairs in the basement, and she'd come upstairs and found Jonah. This is before my ex-husband got home. And fortunately, she took the kids right out of the house to a friend's house, because when we got home, all the blood had spattered through the floor, all over the bed where the kids had been sleeping. So,
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you both for sharing difficult stories. And I think it's important to honor them, and also important for people to understand that statistics we see on a daily basis, we get so we don't understand the depth of the story and the pain and the individuals involved. We get so used to hearing about gun violence every day. As a society, maybe we're calloused at times because there's only so much we can take in. And so I thank you for sharing your story, so we get to really see how incredible these two children were, and how incredibly you suffered, and Jonah too, in Jonah's case. And what I think I've heard that in the English language, there's no word for a person who survives their child because it's too horrible to name. And what I find so profound about both of your stories is that not only did you survive, but you turned your grief into work to help others so that they wouldn't feel the pain and their children wouldn't suffer and die as yours did. And I have such deep respect for both of you, that you had the strength and love and kindness, fortitude to do that. And you have each made a profound difference. And I know you continue to fight for uh, a decrease in gun violence, an increase in gun safety. And Gwen, you want to tell us a little bit about what you have done since that day and what you continue to do?
sure. So what, as soon as I found out Jonah had died, even before my ex came to the hospital, I called him back another time on the phone, and I pretty much knew, and I said, are they going to take our children away, our other children? Because that's what I assumed would happen, is my child had access to a firearm. I would have to fight and say, look, I had given my ex-husband articles, I've given him statistics, I bought lock boxes for him to lock up his firearms in. This was not my firearm. I didn't know it was there, and I would have to fight to get my other custody of my other children. That's what I assumed would happen in the wake of Jonah's death. And instead, what happened was nothing. There were no consequences. Um, Even after Jonah died, um, then following May, one of my other children was struggling with their mental health, and I had just sat in the ER with him for 48 hours to get him placed in a hospital. And I came back to the house and opened the car door that was unlocked of my ex-husband's. And right next to the safe that I had bought him to carry a gun in when he had to go to work with one, which he didn't have to have one, he chose to have one because they didn't allow guns in the home after that, was a loaded firearm right next to the safe that he just couldn't even be bothered to put in the safe in his car on our property. Um, and at that point, that was the end of our relationship. I asked him to leave, and then I said, "You're not allowed to be alone with the children. I can't trust you with the children when you can't lock up your firearms." And he contested it. He got 50% custody of my children. And he, the judge did say, okay, you have to get all the firearms out of your house. And when I asked, well, how would we know if he had done that? The judge said, well, laughed and said, well, that's above my pay grade. And then turned around to my lawyer and said, don't make me feel guilty. So when I, I spent a lot of time being angry, and there's nothing better for something with your anger. Um, so here in Michigan, and I wish it was nationwide. Um, but here in Michigan, I testified in front of the Senate for safe storage, which we have now passed, safe storage of firearms. If Jonah died today, my ex-husband would be facing 15 years in prison for failure to secure a firearm, resulting in a minor gaining access to it and causing the death of themselves or someone else. Instead, there are still no consequences for him, but I've changed that for other families. And as we've seen, prosecutors are following through on things, as we saw in the case of Ethan Crumbley here in Michigan. I feel like the tide is changing. I also, when I'm able to go elsewhere, was at the sit-in for the assault weapons ban a couple of summers ago at the U.S. Capitol, organized by Sam Schwartz, who's cousin of Sandy Hook victim. And I really admire people who constantly day in, day out do this work. I do it as I'm able. I was in Albany in March supporting my friend Diana, who lost her beautiful son Francesco, also at the age of 17. Also within the same week in October, that Jonah died. Um, Again, because his other parents thought that it was okay for him to keep his shooting weapon, his skeet shooting weapon on the bed, even though he had expressed some suicidal thoughts. Um, so she's getting Francesco's law passed in New York. But everything is an uphill battle right now. Um, and in this country, it is just unbelievable that the number one killer of children and teens are firearms, but we we can't even get a law passed saying children should not have access to firearms. It, it,
Yeah.
it's insanity.
Thank you, Gwen. Amanda, in the aftermath of Laura's death, what did you do to try to change the system?
Well, I just want to thank Gwen for sharing her story and her long journey. And it seems like at so many points in this, you were re-victimized by a system that failed you. Certainly the judicial system in terms of the custody. And just thank you for sharing that and your advocacy.
You
You
as
talked
well.
about there is no word for parents who've lost a child. There actually is a word in Chinese, and a literal translation of that is person without a future. And
Mm.
it's interesting you brought that up because I think that is why my husband and I got involved in advocacy work. I had to find a new future. I had to find meaning in my life again. It was stripped of meaning. Um, Getting involved in gun violence prevention advocacy was a natural fit for me. I actually joined what's now called the Brady Campaign back in the 1980s because I was always concerned about gun violence. I did a donation once a year. That was it. We did our annual donation 15 days before Laura was killed. And after the shooting, I realized I need to do more than write a check once a year. And that was the same time that it was after the Million Mom March had happened in Washington, and sort of the grassroots effort for working for gun violence prevention was taking off. And California, where I lived at the time, had a lot of Brady, what we call Brady chapters. And so I immediately plugged in with the work that was going on there and other advocates, and worked with the Brady National Policy Office, and had a very big learning curve. But in the end, my husband and I passed about 80 bills in California, which of course is a state very receptive to the kind of work we were trying to do in our effort to save lives. My husband and I first worked on mental health care advocacy, trying to get more funding for mental health care treatment. And a lot of that work kind of informed our later work on gun violence prevention. So, it was a learning journey. And I think one point I want to make is that gun violence is very broad. Gun violence occurs in many forms, and of course, the most pe most gun deaths are actually suicide. A lot of people, I'm sure you know that, Gwen. A lot of people don't know that. Often it's hidden. Obituaries in newspapers often don't mention as suicide, and people often don't realize that. And there's so many strategies that can help, such as safe storage being the key one that you're working on, Gwen. Um, and so that's one way to approach reducing suicide. But then there's other ways to approach, for example, the gun deaths that are happening in urban communities that are disproportionately impacting Black and Brown people, and tends to be in communities with, high rates of poverty and unemployment, but also where there are a lot of guns. And how do all these illegal guns get into those communities? So there's a lot of work that can be done with regulating gun dealers and making sure that good business practices are followed and holding them accountable, so to divert this flow of illegal guns to impacted communities. In terms of school shootings, for example, three-quarters of the guns used in school shooting come from the home. And one of the things we did in California, and we just did it this year in Colorado, where I live now, is requiring school districts to send notices home to parents about safe storage and child access prevention laws in their state. We thought we needed different messengers to convey that. If parents lock up with their gun, schools are safer, homes are safer, suicide, particularly suicide by youth, may be reduced. So there's just so many different ways to tackle this issue that comes in so many different forms. That's sort of the broader look at it all.
What was it
Yeah.
like, Amanda, going from California, which you say is, very gun safety friendly, to Colorado, which is known to be more in line with protecting the Second Amendment at
Yeah.
all costs?
It's been a difficult transition. I mean, obviously in California, after doing it for 15 years, I knew the players, I knew the dynamics, the politics, the policy really well. And it was very hard to start over in Colorado, particularly because I wanted to retire. It wears you down, and I was burned out and took a break, but then couldn't stay away from the issue. I'm involved at a much smaller level. Um, Colorado was a red state, purple, and I would say it's kind of a blue state now. The legislature is able to pass gun policies, many of which I worked on in California long ago. So it's kind of exciting to see Colorado doing what we worked on in California. The governor is not receptive. A lot of the bills get weakened, so he would sign them. But I think so. There's a lot just for my learning curve about the process and dynamics and laws here. But the key difference notice is that the pro-gun interests are more dug in Colorado. And I'm thinking in California, I think they kind of gave up in that bright blue state. And I don't even remember hearing, well, we're just going to challenge what you're doing in the courts. And of course, they are. In Colorado, you're starting to hear that a little bit from the pro-gun advocates, but they do fight back more and are more dug in. I haven't, and there's higher gun ownership in Colorado. Um, Suicide rate here is well above the national average, which often goes with high gun ownership. So there definitely is a different, sort of more Duggan pro-gun culture here.
Gwen, talk a little bit about the gun culture in Michigan as you've come to understand it as an activist.
Yeah, so again, like I was a medic in Detroit for 6 years for the city of Detroit, which of course is, Detroit was the homicide capital of America for several years. I believe that was back in the late 80s, early 90s. Um, but definitely, the urban gun problem, the access to firearms and is very frightening, but also people, my husband was saying when he was a teenager, his father gave him a gun and said, if somebody knocks on the door, don't open the door, just fire through the door, right? Like there is a lot of worries about safety in those areas. And that's a lot of times why the kids end up
Yeah,
being armed is because they're frightened. We're seeing a lot of thefts from vehicles at the moment. Which is often because they end up getting traded for drugs. That's a big problem right now. And again, there's areas that are safer and there's areas that are not as safe. But like I always say, when I'm calling legislators, if I'm calling a legislator outside my state, we have porous borders. We don't have state lines where they stop and frisk you for firearms, right? Like that's not a thing. So our gun laws are only as safe as all of the states in the nation. That's why people want to point out Chicago. Oh, well, Illinois has strict gun laws, and there's so much. There was over 1,000 children killed in Chicago in 2024 or 20, I think it was 2023. But that's because they're next to other states that don't have these laws, right? Where all the gun violence in Mexico comes from, it comes from our firearms that get across the border or are sold. And again, holding the gun sellers accountable. My friend Denise, her son, again at the age of 17, was shot in the head with a ghost gun of his friends. The friend was 17. This was the third ghost gun that he had um, online illegally, and his mother had even told the gun seller, this person is 17. You please don't sell another kit to this person. The third ghost gun is the one that shot Guy in the head. Guy amazingly survived, but he has seizures. He has crippling anxiety. He lost his eye and had to have reconstructive surgery. Um, but yeah, and then I live in a rural area, right? I was at a friend's house yesterday and you could hear automatic gunfire going constantly. I live in a town where half of it is a red county and the other half shares a county with Ann Arbor. And so, it's very mixed, right? You know, I always ask, as everyone should, before my children go to someone's house, do you have firearms? Um, I know my son's best friend's father has firearms, and I ask him every time, that child tends to come to our house, but if he's over there, where is the firearm? Do you have it locked up separate from the ammunition? No. So yeah, there is a gun culture in Michigan. There is a big hunting, culture. This is where the Michigan militia is, right? There's definitely, we went red, this election. So yeah, in a way, it's very similar to Colorado in that there's areas that are not, right? You know, Boulder, the universities, right? There's not as much gun culture, but then there's also very rural areas and hunting areas. So yeah, I feel like a lot of states in the US kind of have this dichotomy. Yeah.
Well, California had that too, and certainly Colorado does. The population's in the Front Range, so obviously there's more representation in the state legislature. Um, and that's why they can get bills passed. But certainly in the rural areas, it's there's a different feeling. Although what I find so discouraging about the issue is that poll for over 50 years, poll after poll have shown that Americans do not support a gun ban, but they support gun control measures, measures to reduce gun violence that are short of a ban. So the public opinion is there, and I know in the last decade, polling on universal background checks, for example, has been very high, even among gun owners, depending on the poll, in the high 80s, even in the 90s, and yet we can't get it done nationally. And it's so discouraging because we know gun laws work. Gun laws save lives. And California is such an example of that. California had a much higher gun death rate than the rest of the nation going into the 1990s. The Stockton schoolyard shooting happened in 1989, and California passed an assault weapons ban. The next year, 1990, they passed universal background checks in the waiting period. By 92, 93, California's gun death rate started to drop. And we saw it drop every year in California, where some years in the United States and went up. And by 2021, I have the statistic here, the firearm death rate in California decreased 49% and it increased 6% in the rest of the nation. I mean, that's a huge difference. Yet we haven't
It's a
banned
huge
guns in
difference.
California. It might be harder to get a gun. There's a 10-day waiting period, extensive background check in California, but they have not banned guns. So we can do laws that we know will save lives without banning guns. And I think the
And I
American people
love
would
the
support
waiting
that.
period.
Pardon?
I love the waiting
Yeah.
period. That's what we're trying to do in mental health, right? Is decrease impulsivity,
Yeah. Really
decrease
helpful.
this.
Yeah.
So that's where we need
Yeah.
the space.
Yeah. So there's been lots of studies with states. Missouri had a strong background check law, and then they let it expire, or they passed legislation to end the law, and their homicide rate went up. In Connecticut, they passed universal background check, and in more recent years, I think it was 1995, and you can see the drop. I mean, so there's lots of studies that are showing that these gun laws can make a difference. Of course, gun policy is only one part of the solution. I think it's changing um, norms and attitudes, sort of a cultural shift about guns, safe storage
Sure.
particularly. Your ex-husband to change his approach about firearm safety, would make a huge difference. And how do we create that change, like our society did with tobacco, in a way? And so I think this safe storage is a really good place to focus on, and the ask campaign, or asking parents, before play dates if they have guns locked up, and those kinds of things maybe can help shift public opinion a bit on it. I know one thing, Brady campaign has been working with Hollywood producers to show locking up guns more. So I
Oh,
saw
I love it.
yeah, I saw. I mean, I don't watch TV much, or TV series, but there's a law enforcement show that's very popular. And they now, when the cop comes home from work and he goes home and says hi to his wife, and she's asking, how is your day? They show him locking up his gun before he hugs her and her kids. So things like, again, to try and create new norms. And that's a challenge.
Yes. I was just going to say, and it makes no sense. The majority of gun owners want their guns to be secure, right?
Right.
This is not a difficult thing. My friend Diana was coming up against someone who was like, "Well, I'm in a hunting area. People don't want to lock their guns up." I'm like, "Why? I mean, are the
Why
deer
not?
breaking into their house? Are they gonna need it? You know, why would you need a gun ready access if you're using it for hunting? That makes no sense." Yeah.
That's what I was going to get at as we're starting to draw a little bit to a close here. But I want to ask what you think is the answer to the question why. We're not talking about a gun ban. We're talking about gun safety. We're talking about minor inconveniences or measures that save lives. And yet, why the fragility? Why does that freak out so many gun owners? What's going on psychologically that this is even an issue anymore? Amanda,
Well,
you want to answer that, and then Gwen?
yeah, well, kind of on a couple of different levels. I think some of it's ideological and sort of just the divisions our politics and we've created in our society, and it reflects that. And I think there's libertarians or certain groups that don't want any laws, so there's that. I don't think that's the majority of people. Um, so there's sort of two areas that come to mind. One is when we were working on strengthening an assault weapons ban in California, which I was involved in. Um, I remember a staffer, we met with legislative staff explaining the bill and why it's needed, et cetera. And somehow the conversation went, why did people object to this so much? And he said, think of it as a young male adult with a car, and they want a bigger car, a faster car, that's more impressive. And he kind of put assault weapons in that category. Um, but what I have found, this was more in Nevada County, in California, where I often had conversations with gun owners who thought they disagreed with us in our rural county. And my husband and I would often meet with them to have a discussion. And it was amazed me how many policies they agreed with, particularly background checks. Um, and what I've come away from those conversations is the difference isn't policy so much, it's the role of fear in in our lives. I do not feel afraid all the time. I don't feel I need a gun handy all the time to protect myself. In fact, I know your home is actually less safe when there's a gun in it. The more likely to be domestic violence or suicide or unintentional shooting. But this extreme fear that people have, and I think that's different than what Gwen was talking about in an inner city where everyone has guns, and so you have a gun and shoot when someone knocks on your door because they're going to shoot you. I mean, that's kind of a different world that I admit I don't know. And I know there were surveys done of inner city youth that said they would love not having a gun if no one else had a gun. So how do you break that cycle? I don't know. But for people who live in sort of middle class neighborhoods where there's not a lot of crime, um, there just seems to me to be a extreme amount of fear. And
Gwen?
and what speaks to that is when the COVID pandemic started, the gun sales just shot through the roof because people had fear then. There was a lot of uncertainty. Are we going to get all our food? I mean, I thought, well, do I want to be in a position of shooting someone over toilet paper? No, I don't think so. But, if someone comes in, wants my TV, they can have it. I don't want to kill someone. But, times of uncertainty and fear certainly increase gun sales. So I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
Gwen, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, look at anything. Anytime we try to change anything, right? It's a knee jerk. There's some people out there who are like, I won't wear my seatbelt. Oh, okay. You don't want to, right? Like change is hard. And
Yeah.
the very idea, I mean, I grew up in England, and the very idea to me that to own a firearm would be a universal right is makes no sense. It just doesn't. Why would it's literally a killing machine? People are like, well, you have knives. Yeah, but knives are for other things. You do other things with knives. You chop vegetables with them, right? Like we have machines that are for killing things. The end. And in our Constitution, although I disagree with the understanding of the Second Amendment, the idea that everybody can have a killing machine and that somehow that's your fundamental right, but also life is your fundamental right is just it. Well, it speaks to the juxtaposition of America, really. You know, we have the right to life and we have the right to kill people over our life.
Seems like it.
Mm. Let's talk a few minutes about what's next on each of your plates as you continue to work on this issue. Gwen, what are you working on right now?
So I have been taking a bit of a break. I was doing a lot more of with the last administration, meeting with Kamala Harris's team because they had this Office of Gun Violence Prevention. So I would end up in Washington at least a couple or DC a couple times a year. I love Newtown Action Alliance. I feel like they are very engaged. They have weekly calls with lots of partners where they have specific goals. So this week it was addressing the fact that the big beautiful bill does away with banning of bump stocks. Is that what it? I would have to look at it again. What is it? Silencers. That's it. Yeah, silencers. So they come out with an information sheet. They have a speaker on whatever it is every Monday. There's an afternoon session and an evening session, and then they have an updated spreadsheet called this senator, this person signed on, this is what you say to this person. And it's very, very clear. They work extremely hard. So I try to do as much as I can with them, but again, working full time and having uh 3 other children. I'm just very busy, but I have, I love doing things like this where I can just raise awareness, right? I just spoke to a woman who is a journalist who does pictorial images of the stories that she writes, and she is doing a whole book on the face of gun violence in America. And so she interviewed me for that book. So basically, I do what I can when I can, and continue to try to support my friend Diana, who's trying to get this legislation through. Do what I can with Newtown Action Alliance. I'm gonna go to the AAPI conference at the end of this month in Chicago on gun violence prevention. So I'm pretty excited about that. Just to learn more, I just feel like there's so much to know, and every time I log someone to a conference, I just learn more, and I learn more ways to talk to people about it, right? Because at the end of the day, that's like you said, Amanda, that's what we need to do. We need to talk to people one on one and have them understand where no one's coming for your guns. That's not even a thing. We can't get safe storage passed nationally. Nobody's coming for your guns. We're trying to keep your children safe, my children safe, and build a nation that where we don't have to shoot through the door at each other.
What about you, Amanda? What's keeping you busy these days in this arena?
Well, I'm amazed all that Gwen's able to do with children and working. So thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you.
So I'm part of the Gun Violence Prevention Coalition in Colorado, where I still have a lot to learn, and so know of events, and we coordinate on legislation. And I have testified on bills, and will continue to. I work with Brady's policy team on legislation that we want to prioritize, and so I do kind of what I did in California. Uh, to a lesser degree, we have Brady staff now. We didn't in California. Nick and I did it all. And besides, we're retired and we're traveling more and bike riding and all kinds of things. But I can't give it up totally. But I do feel discouraged. So we worked in California when we were most of our advocacy was during the after Laura was killed. It was during the George W. Bush years when it was announced that the NRA had a place in the Oval Office and nothing was going to happen nationally or nothing good. And so we were focused at the state level. And of course, California was a great state. And I think that started for me where I just feel it's so hopeless nationally. Um, and I've been in a position to be in states and live near the capital, near enough to the capital, where I can be involved in state policy making. So that's really where I put my effort, first in California and then in Colorado. But I feel very discouraged. As I mentioned, California has the strongest gun laws in the nation. Yes, we've brought our gun death rate down significantly in California, but we're still off the charts compared to the rest, other developed countries in terms of gun deaths. And I feel the missing piece, which I talked about a little bit earlier, is this cultural change that we need to do. And so I thought, well, what can I do? I don't think real strident gun owners, I'm not the messenger as someone associated with the Brady campaign, not necessarily. I might try and have good conversations. I'm part of an effort through the University of Colorado to bring people together and find mutual understanding. But so one of the projects I would like to work on, I think, is Colorado has a very high veteran population. There's a lot of bases in Colorado, and veteran suicide is very high, largely because of access to guns. Um, and Brady shared with me a PSA that they had developed, or the ad council had developed for them, of a veteran whose brother, who is also a vet, died by firearm suicide. And he had a very good way of talking about it and basically promoting locking up your guns. And so a project I would like is for us to contact the different media stations in the Colorado Springs area, which has a particularly high veteran population, the Air Force bases there, and see if we can get these PSAs aired, because that's a very good messenger to a specific population that maybe could make a difference. We're having in Colorado, because so many of our gun deaths are by suicide, which has just been harder to legislate, really. Um, and that's pointed out, oh, we've passed all the gun laws and the gun deaths aren't coming down. Well, it's harder with suicide. And I think we need other approaches. So I guess I'm looking at going beyond the policy part and trying to do the education and sort of cultural change that is needed, some very much needed on this issue.
Thank you both so much. And then ask if you had any final comments or any discussion before we close up. So Gwen, go ahead.
I just want to give a little plug. I forgot like kind of what we're doing locally. That's where I've been really trying to focus more. Thank you as well, Amanda, just for all your hard work. 80 bills is amazing. And I'm so glad that you can take that to Colorado and keep working. But what's brought me hope is the small, like you say, going to the state. I feel like we got a lot passed in Michigan. We still have work to do with the ghost guns and but locally I'm on the board of two nonprofits. One, my friend Denise, whose son Guy was shot in the head, we have a program called Life, that's partially funded by the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department, an offshoot of that, that where we do some gun safety trainings. We've just started our pilot program. Well, actually, it's our second program, but of teen education program. And so our first class is babysitting. Like I say, this is our second cohort, but we teach with babysitting, we teach, gun safety, appropriate, making sure that babysitting for people who have guns in the home. We're teaching CPR, we're teaching first aid, so we can encompass a lot of things, but also it gives kids something to do, a way to make money. We're trying to do more programming to kind of keep kids busy during the summer. And again, like not on the streets or getting into trouble. And then I also wanted to plug a little bit the other nonprofit I'm on the board of, which is the Charles W. Um, Community Help Center. And that was founded by my friend Mia, who lost her son, Chuck, to firearm homicide, and also just lost some cousins last week to firearm homicide, unfortunately. But this is in the northwest side of Detroit. We do food giveaways, book bag giveaways, and, just bring awareness. We bring together nonprofits that can support youth in the area, and kids and adults. We have events where there are, from all different nonprofits that can provide services, include like getting jobs and food and gun safety and all of those. So that's what we're doing locally, which again, I think it's very important to get into the communities and build a trust to know, like, hey, this isn't just about gun safety, because again, like you said, a lot of it starts out of poverty. And if we can fill some basic needs, if we can provide resources, then, we are diminishing the fear and the insecurity that exists in those areas. So,
And they're changing the culture, which Amanda spoke of the importance
Mhm.
of. Yeah. Amanda, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, I lived in California for 40, almost 45 years, but I grew up in Michigan, suburban Detroit in
oh,
Fredericton. And
okay, yep.
I had no
when I,
idea.
yeah, when I was a middle schooler, my parents were out of the country on a trip, and I was staying with a neighbor. I'm the youngest of five. I guess my siblings were all off by that time. Um, and the home was burglarized, and it was odd. There were some Oriental or Persian rugs that were stolen. A couple of paintings were cut out of the frames. They didn't have big value. It was also creepy, but it was nothing major. We lost some rugs. Um, and then I don't know, 2 months later, my father got a call from the police agency. I don't know what the jurisdiction was, saying, "We found your gun. We have your gun."
Mm.
And my father said, "What gun?" And then, he recollected, and it turns out he recalled that his father had severe Parkinson's, and my father was worried he was going to try to kill himself. And so my father took his gun, which was a good thing to do, and just stuck it in the shelf of the closet, not locked up or anything, which was a bad thing to do, right? But so because I thought, well, we're not the problem. We don't have guns. Sometimes we are the problem. I mean, thank goodness they got that gun before it was used in a crime or someone harmed with it, because it turned out my father wasn't storing it securely. He didn't even know he had it. Um, so I thought, well, the problem are the gun owners. They're the ones shooting, or people
And also
accessing
the
guns
lack
to
of
shoot.
ability to get rid of the guns. I was actually in a study through U of M about like trying to come up with solutions on how do we get rid of guns,
Yeah, well, so my
right?
theory is we have to, we really need to work with the gun owners more, right? Because the safe storage message in a way doesn't, I give that message out, but I don't have guns. I don't have anything to do really with that. But how, we need to reach out to gun owners and work with gun owners. So I'm pleased to be part of, it's the University of Colorado's Firearm Injury Prevention Initiative, and I'm on the Community Advisory Board.
Awesome.
It's been very intimidating. I just don't feel very knowledgeable yet about everything with Colorado. And everyone else is pretty hardcore pro gun. And I have told myself I need to start speaking out a little more, in a constructive way, not judgmental, but I don't feel like I've been doing what I should do and getting my message out in a way that maybe it can be heard. So some of us have said, hey, separate from our quarterly Zoom meetings, let's get together and have conversations. So I'm going to try doing that in this state. We'll see how it goes. And I'll just sort of the line I wish they could hear. I'm not sure. I mean, I can say it. I'm not sure it's heard. Is feeling safer with a gun doesn't mean you're actually safer with a gun.
Gwendolyn
Well, thank you
LaCroix
for your continued work.
and Amanda Wilcox, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm glad I got to connect you two amazing women, and I hope you stay in touch and support each other.
Thank you for
You
bringing
ever
us
get
together,
back?
Carolyn.
Yeah, thank you,
Okay,
Carolyn, for
thank you.
highlighting such an important issue as well in your
Yeah.
podcast.
Okay, have a wonderful day.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Bye.
Nice
Thank
to meet
you.
you, Amanda.
Yes.
Come back to
Likewise.
Michigan and visit.
Yeah.
That's it for the Whimsy Farm podcast today. I'm Carolyn Crane, your host and producer. This podcast is produced on the sacred land of the Anishinaabe people. Thanks to the California band Castle House for writing and performing our music. Thanks to our underwriter, Just Play Productions, and to our paid Patreon members for their support of today's podcast. If you'd like to offer your support, please visit my website, whimsyfarm.net, and click the Patreon link to find a level of support that's right for you. There's also a free membership level. You can email me through the website as well. That's whimsyfarm.net. The Whimsy Farm podcast airs the 1st and 15th of each month on our YouTube channel, Carolyn Crane and Whimsy Farm, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can find links to audio and video and Patreon, all at whimsyfarm.net. Be sure to join me on July 15th when I speak with author and philosopher Elizabeth Minnick about the new expanded edition of her book, The Evil of Banality, on the life and death importance of thinking. Until then, remember the words of Utah Phillips, who said, "Too many good people are doing too many good things to afford me the luxury of being pessimistic." Get out there and create some positive change. Stay safe, everyone.
whimsyfarms.net